Well, here we are at Welham Lake, just on the outskirts of Market Harbour. This water is a day ticket water. I've never fished it before. One only is to look at the lily pads here and it's screaming tench. In fact, talking to a few of the locals as I arrived here this morning, they tell me there's also a fair head of big bream. Of course, the majority of these bream, when they are caught on the ledger. But today, on this water, I'm going to show you the long pole with the short line. Long pole, short line is often a loose term, but really, the length of the pole is not that important, as you'll see. We'll plumb the depth carefully for features, but the real important method, or the important thing about this method, is the distance of line between the end of the pole and the float. So many people make the mistake of having far too long a line. And of course, if you do have too long a line, then you may as well have fished with a rod and reel. But by having a short line, something like 2.5 foot, a metre at the most, then you've got perfect presentation over the little tiny floats that we're able to use with this method. When it comes to choosing a pole, it depends very much on your pocket, of what sort of price you're going to pay. And obviously the more you pay, the better the quality of the pole. I've known people take a second mortgage out to purchase a pole of over £1,000, and then you're looking at top quality. Top quality means a light and very rigid pole. The lighter it is, obviously the more comfortable it is to use, and the more rigid it is, the easier it is to use. I just like to assemble this one, and that's a point as well. When you come to buy your first pole, make sure that it is a put-in pole. The butt section puts up inside the top section. One of the reasons is it's so easy to locate. When you're constantly unshipping the pole to swing in small fish, then all you have to do is, to put it back together again, is locate the two poles together like that, at any angle, straighten it, and it locates itself. And one of the beauties about this system is that it locks itself, and yet when you do want to unship, it's so easy to unship simply by one twist and a pull, and it comes out so easily. And there's nothing worse than a pole that's jammed together when you're trying to unship it in order to swing a fish in. Trying to unship that pole can obviously shake the hook out of the fish's mouth. Another point as well, before you assemble any pole, always look up. Watch out for overhead cables, because there's been some very, very fatal accidents with people not watching out for overhead cables. As regards the length of a pole to buy, don't be kidded by thinking, well, I'll buy a sort of 7 or 8 metre pole, and if I like it, then I'll proceed and buy a longer one. I would go for the long one right away, because then you've got it at any of those shorter lengths, because I'm sure, especially after you see this programme, you'll see how easy this pole fishing is and how quickly you can be addicted to it. There are about 8 different varieties or strengths of elastic, and depending on what hook length you use, then you must use the right elastic to match that hook length. For example, if you're fishing a very hard water where 12-ounce hook lengths are required, then it's a very fine elastic you need. But if you can get away with a 3-pound hook length, then of course it's the heavy elastic that you need in the tip for that occasion. I carry about 3 tip sections, each one carrying a different strength of elastic to suit most conditions. On the end of the pole here, in fact on all of them, you can see this little PTFE bush, which is a self-lubricating material which allows the elastic, when a fish pulls, allows the elastic to come out nice and smoothly. The last thing you want is the elastic to come out in jerks. If it comes out in jerks, every jerk sort of loosens the hook hold in the fish's mouth. If the elastic comes out nice and softly, then fish are landed with success. Little skimmer bream are the worst fish because they're so soft in the mouth that any jerkiness as the elastic comes out of the pole, then you lose perhaps even as much as 50% of the fish that you catch. So let's get on with some fishing. I'm going to start with a mustard hook, a 314's bloodworm hook. In fact, I'm going to start with a size 22 with just a single bloodworm. I'll show you the complete rig and the continental ground bait preparation as we go along. To get the tattle into the water, cast the short section in quite hard. In fact, the harder you cast it in, the straighter the tattle will land in the water and therefore won't tangle. connect the pole up and push the pole out, keeping the tip of the pole low and as much of the tattle in the water, once again avoiding tangles. And as you get to the end of the pole, lift the complete tattle out of the water and then lay it, once again in a nice straight line over our ground baited area. With this short line you can also encourage the fish to bite. And what I like to do, because we're fishing with our bait just touching the bottom, sometimes I like to just lift the float just out of the water, and therefore just lifting the bait off the bottom and then let it fall back down again. And often as you do that, as the bait falls like that, a fish takes it right away. And there's a little fish to start with. Just take the fish out of the swim first of all, and the back of the pole automatically goes on our roller, and swing that little fish right to hand. Only a little fish, but at least it's a start. I'm always pleased to see the first fish, no matter how big it is. Look at that, on the drop. How about that? That fish took it just a foot under the surface and run towards those lilies. It really is solid with tiny fish. And that's another little roach. Let me show you how I fasten the main line to the elastic. I use a piece of fly line backing between the elastic and the main line. It bends towards the fish on striking, resulting in a more positive and direct strike. This fly line backing is a very, very soft material, almost like a dacron, and just cut a reasonable working length. And what I like to do is to join the two together by lying them side by side and then just putting them into my mouth and wetting them, moisten them, and the two sort of hang as one. And then it's simply then just to tie the most simplest of knots. Just fold it over into a loop like that, and then pass those two ends through once, and then the actual fly line backing, the bright yellow one, through on its own a second time. That has really mingled the elastic and the fly line backing into a knot. And if you pull all four ends together to start with, and then the elastic, stretch the elastic, and then pull the actual fly line backing, you do end up with a nice knot. And when you examine that knot, you can see that whilst we've got the elastic coming out of the end of the pole, a piece of the fly line backing appears to be a continuation of the elastic. That is the piece we keep. The other two are now scrap. So with a nice pair of sharp scissors, cut that fly line backing as close to the knot as you can, and cut the extra elastic off. I find if you can stretch the elastic, just put it under a little bit of tension before you actually cut it, it allows you to get the knot nice and neat. Now all we have to do now is to put a little knot about an inch, inch and a half away from that knot. And once again, that's a simple operation of just folding the line over like that and through its own loop. And that is the knot. But of course, if you go through the loop again, it makes the final knot a bit bigger. And I like to go through about 3 times to make a reasonable size knot before I then pull it tight, and like I said, make that knot about an inch, inch and a half away from the end of the elastic. Pull that knot nice and tight, and then just cut that off as close to it as you can. Well, the secret of why the pole beats fish, or good quality fish, why it beats them so quick, is this. You strike, you've got no reel, you're totally reliant on that elastic. And as that elastic stretches out of the pole, it is progressively getting stronger. And it is the word progressively that is the important thing, because that slow and progressive build-up to that fish is hardly realised. And the fish, as the fish dives for the bottom, as that progression of power builds up in the elastic, that fish does a U-turn. And once its head is out of the surface, it's had a gulp of air, half the fight is over. In fact, I saw one chap land a carp in the Shillermill Festival, 17 pound 11 ounces on the pole. He landed it in 5 minutes. I don't think he could do it every day of the week, and maybe the next 10 fish of anywhere near that size he'll probably lose, but he actually hooked that fish, and the elastic did the work for him, and he just pointed the pole skywards, and that fish rolled on the top, and I was about 3 pegs away from him. I can remember that vision of a gill about that big, it looked like a dinner saucer, and an eye, it looked like a pig, wallowing on the top, with him holding the pole skywards, and this thing just wallowed on the top and came wallowing in towards him. Like I said, 6 minutes, 17 pound 11 ounces of carp in the net. It does have some very, very peculiar powers. Now, actually fastening the line to this system is once again quite clever. This whole system was shown to me by an Italian friend of mine whilst I was over there fishing the World Championships. And all he does is, with the nylon line, make a loop, like so, bend the line in a loop, and then just simply bend it together and thread the looped part through its hole like that. Once and twice. Put it through twice, then the knot won't slip. Tighten that up. Cut off that little loose end, that untidy loose end there. And there we have one full knot. Now what I'm going to do now is to actually tie that knot together about there so it'll form like a figure 8. It's exactly the same knot, just hold the two together till we get to the end. Form it, the loop again, through once, and really you should go through twice to stop that, once again, that knot from slipping. But that's our figure 8 loop, and that is the method, that is what we're going to use to attach to the fly line backing. The way that we actually fasten this to the fly line backing is quite simple. Put your finger and thumb through the main loop. The idea is to get that line, the main line now, through that loop to form a slipping hitch. The way I do it is sort of play the guitar with those 3 fingers, bend your wrist over, and you can see now that my finger and thumb is ready to pick up that line. Pick it up and drag it through. That's the simplest way I find. And you can see you've got now that slipping hitch. Put that slipping loop over the top of the fly line. Let's bring the fly line backing up here. Put that over the fly line backing. Keep hold of the knot on the fly line backing with your finger and thumb, and simply now just pull that loop. Sometimes it does catch on the knot. So just help it over like that and slide that so it tightens onto the fly line backing, and then slides down until it locates on that knot, and that's the method of attaching. You may wonder what this little loop here is for. Well, simply at the end of the day, when you wish to put the rig back on its winder, just get hold of that little loop and give it a tug, and the whole thing comes off, ready to go back on your winder. Let's have a look at some floats which are ideal for this type of water. This is a typical range of floats for this type of fishing to suit all conditions. But if you look at this first one, it's got a double taper and is an ideal float when you've got absolutely flat, calm conditions. You can see this double taper is very, very sensitive. But make sure that you shot all these floats with bristles so that only the bristle or even part of the bristle is showing. And because of this very, very tapered balsa leading to the bristle, if you get a little lift bite, you can actually see that little bit of balsa grow out of the surface of the water. It shows the most delicate of bites in those flat, calm conditions. When you've got a chop on the water, then without doubt this flat top float holds in that surface meniscus absolutely perfectly, and bites are shown very, very easily. This little tiny one here is what I call my animal rig. It's a float I use when I get the fish feeding on the caster, usually better quality fish we expect to catch on the caster. and it only takes 3 number 10s shot. And the way I fish this is about a foot over depth, with the first shot about 14 inches from the hooks. Therefore, you've got that first little shot about 2 inches off the bottom, and then just evenly spread the next 2 little number 10s. But most important with this one, it also requires a back shot. In other words, where the line comes from the surface of the float, or the top of the float, then a little tiny shot about 3 inches above the float just sinks that line under the surface out of harm's way, and that float there stays stable with that caster or even double caster lay on the bottom. Those big fish pick it up, they swim off, and that little float just pops under and they feel no resistance at all. It's a real crack of that, and when you're in for a good weight of quality fish, that's the one. The float I'm going to start with today is this little beauty here. And the reason I like this, you can see that it's got a wire stem, right, therefore it's not balsa right the way through. Consequently, it doesn't take as much shot. And the rig that I'm going to use is just a little light style rig where I can search the swim from top to bottom and find out just where those fish are feeding. Let's have a closer look at the shutting pattern on this float. I've got one here already made up. I've just took this pole winder anchor, this little elastic method of fastening the line onto the winder. Take that off and just undo this rig. On the end of this, tied to 12-ounce line, is a mustard 314. It's a very fine hook, ideal for the bloodworm, and that's the bait I'm going to start with. This hook is tied to 12-ounce line, and in the middle of this 10-inch hook length is a tiny number 7 style to allow that bait to fall nice and naturally. The main line is 1.75 pounds, and in fact on the end of the main line, you can see under my finger there, is a little tiny loop, and that's how I fasten the hook length with a half blood knot to that loop. It means if I have to pull for a break, that each and every time all it requires is to tie a new hook length on, and you're quickly back in the water. The actual shotting pattern, I start off with a style weight right on that knot, a number 8 style, and just a couple of inches above it, a number 9 style, then increase the gap to a number 10 style, increase the gap yet again to a number 12 style. And that is my starting rig. Now if those fish prove to be on the drop, even more on the drop, this rig as it is will search through the water from top to bottom. But if I find the bites coming off the bottom and I wish to catch those fish mid-water or make this tattle more attractive to fish taking baits on the drop, then I can simply slide these styles up the line, still obeying this rule about gap distances, but space them out even more so that the tattle will fall even gently, more gently through the water, attracting fish at all depth or bites at all depth. If necessary, I can then move all those styles, bulk them all down, almost as a mini olivette, if I wish to zoom the bait to the bottom after I find the fish are maybe on the bottom. So it's got so many variations, this rig. That is why this is the rig with a pinky on the hook that I'm going to start with. To attach the plummet, simply just pass the hook through the little brass ring and then just bed the point of the hook in the cork that's laid there in the bottom of the plummet. Simple as that. And I'm going to start by plumbing the depth right in the margins, and we get a true picture of the full contour. And by lowering the float down very, very slowly, I can see that the float is just out of the water as the plummet is thumping onto the bottom. I'm going to add another section on in the search for the bottom of that shelf, because it is important I find if there is a shelf at all, and more important, if there is, where it finally finishes, because it is on the flat ground at the bottom of the shelf that I shall probably pick as my ground baiting area. So by sticking that extra section on, and now just lowering the pole again, this time the float goes right under by, I would think, about 6 inches. What I have to do is just increase that depth. In fact, with a view to it going deeper all the time, I'm going to increase it about 12 inches. Replumb. Yes, the float has just gone under, so it's gone about 12 inches deeper in 1 metre farther out. Let's just increase that depth a little more so we know exactly where we're up to. quite a in fact, it's a very severe shelf here. It seems to be going on and on. It's still going deeper. The farther out we go towards those lilies, it's still going deeper and deeper. I'm going to have to extend the depth even more. It is very important that you do this system exactly right and find out just where the bottom of these shelves are. We'll just lower the plummet down again. And there you are, the plummet is touching the bottom and just the tip of the float is showing. In fact, it's just gone under. And that will be my starting depth, with the bait, in other words, just touching the bottom. So what we've got now, we've got a flat surface, which is about a midway point, or about 2 metres, between the tip of the pole and the actual lily pads. What I'm going to decide to do is put the final section of this pole on, which will put me at a midway place between the bottom of the shelf and the lily pads. So that way I can draw fish from the lily pads and also fish that are patrolling the bottom of that shelf. And that's going to be my decision of where I'm going to put the bombardment. Let's just check it at that final length, just to make sure that it is flat again. Yes, it is exactly the same depth. So we've got a nice flat plateau there between the bottom of the shelf and the lilies, and that's going to be our marker. I'm going to put the pole in its rest, which is a nice little gadget, and of course you can adjust this rest, and I like to adjust it so the tip of the pole is just off the surface of the water, because we're going to mix the ground bait now, and obviously the tip of that pole will be my marker for throwing the ground bait out. My favourite mix for a lake is a product that's been around a long time, the French product Magic, and this is a red Magic, and I'm going to use today just a good half bag of Magic and half a bag of this Tilt. Now Tilt is a bottom feed, it's a binder, and it's extremely useful when using choker. It gets those balls, it binds them together, yet at the same time, once they hit the bottom, then they disperse quickly and flatten out on the bottom. And equal portions of this Tilt to the actual red Magic. And of course, on a still water like this, or any water in fact that contains good quality fish, then I wouldn't be without hemp of one form or another. And whilst I've got some just ordinary boiled hemp ready to loose feed on top of this, this grilled hemp helps to give me that particle movement that I'm looking for. We don't need a lot of that, just sort of a third of a bag. And taking a lesson from the carp boys with fruity flavours, and there's so many boilies and things that get thrown in these waters that the big fish do seem to be attracted to sweet smelling or fruity flavoured additives. I don't use a lot, I just put a little bit of that very, very sweet smelling additive in and then mix the whole lot together. And of course it is important that you do mix it thoroughly. And if I just turn it over like that until I see all that mixed together, blend it all together and turn, scoop all the corners round and mix it thoroughly till it's ready. That smells beautiful already. I could almost eat that myself. Now then, as regards adding the water, you know, in most books it'll tell you to add the ground bait to the water. I'm a great believer in adding the water to the ground bait, because this way you've got perfect control of just how much water to add. And I like to add the water just a little at a time, and stirring vigorously as I'm adding the water, and try to distribute it equally along the ground bait. And just keep turning until you feel that ground bait start to bind together. And as soon as you feel it bind together and there's not a lot of dry stuff left, then you can leave the water alone and get 2 hands in the ground bait and really fluff it up. Now the secret in fluffing a ground bait up is to get air in it and lift it. Lift the air underneath it and fluff it right up and mix it thoroughly. Don't just play around with it and daub it, just fluff it around and get it as fluffy as you can by lifting it. You can see this is coming together quite nicely. Now, another lesson I learned from the Continentals regards the mixing of ground bait is they have a way where they actually inject more air into the ground bait simply by putting the ground bait, the now wetted ground bait, through a maggot sieve. And all you do is just empty the wetted ground bait onto the sieve and shake it through. This transforms the ground bait into an absolutely excellent fluffy ground bait, as you'll see. The little lumps that are left, we're not going to throw those away. They just collected a little more water than the rest. And just with the flat of your hand, push those through the sieve until they're virtually all gone. And you can see underneath what we're left with, and that is a lovely textured, fluffy ground bait. And that's ready. Now, when I say ready, that is ready now for adding the jokers. Now, the best way to keep jokers, obviously, is cool, but I mean how to keep them. And that is to wrap them in newspaper in a shallow parcel. And whatever you do, never put any weight on those jokers because they are a very, very delicate thing and they soon squash and they soon die. Even now, those jokers are starting to mat together. They're still alive, even though they look lifeless at the minute. But because they are matted together, what I'm going to do is split all those jokers up, and the easiest way is with leam. This is leam in this container here. All it is, it's a soil from the continent. Looks like sand. If I just put some on my hand there, you can see it looks like a dry sand, but it's got no grittiness at all. If you mention the word sand to a continental as regards an additive to his ground bait, he would really frown, because when a fish starts to forage in that ground bait on the bottom and kicks up any sand that's likely to go in the fish's gills, then it would only irritate it and the fish would soon clear off. So it's a special soil of no abrasion in it at all. And you don't need much, just a couple of squirts like that, and you'd be surprised how that actually breaks all those jokers up and makes them all into individuals. Just turn them over, perhaps just a little bit more. And what you're doing in actual fact is you're coating each and every one of those jokers to make them into an individual. And now we can easily distribute those right amongst our ground bait. Mix that now thoroughly amongst that ground bait. All that's left now is to actually make this ground bait into balls. These balls are then going to be thrown at the tip of our pole, which remember is our marker. That looks a solid ball of ground bait, but when that hits the bottom, it quickly breaks back up into a powder like that. In actual fact, that is always the sign of a good quality ground bait. I like to place the ground bait on the top of my box, stand behind it, and then I can be really accurate at placing those balls of ground bait right on the tip of that pole whilst the pole is pointing at my marker lily. So here we go, one behind the other. The balls of ground bait are going to go right on the tip of that pole. Don't fall into the trap of just mixing a load up and throwing it in without rhyme or reason. Think, give a little bit of thought to the fishery, of the potential of that fishery, and then try to work out just how much ground bait you can throw in. But also always remember that there are not many fisheries that will take two bombardments. This initial bombardment will go in, and then from me there will be no further ground bait. I can now guarantee that those balls of ground bait have landed in the deepest water at the bottom of that shelf and on the edge of those lilies, on that flat plateau. The perfect peg. I'll try a bloodworm for starters, and just put the hook just in the second segment, just below the head. The head is the little green part, but sometimes the bloodworm actually curls up instead of hanging nice and long and appetising. And the way to straighten it is don't try to straighten it with your fingers, simply cast it in hard and lash that bloodworm onto the surface of the water. And the shock of that virtually straightens it and it becomes a more tempting bait. Once again, couple up, push the pole out, pointing the tip downwards, and then turn it towards the far bank marker and lay it on the water. Now you have to watch that float settle very, very carefully. There's another one, on the drop again. There are hordes of little fish out there. In fact, I'll stand for it for a little while, but I'll soon have to think about changing tactics. So this very light shutting pattern I've got here is encouraging these small fish to feed. And there are two ways I can get around it. One is to condense this strung out shutting pattern and fish just the normal olivette and a dropper shot. In other words, zoom the bait speedily past all those little fish and hopefully look for a bigger sample on the bottom. But I'm just going to carry on with this rig for a minute because sometimes it may be just an initial half dozen or dozen fish before the big ones actually arrive. I haven't fished this water before. I don't know its potential apart from what fish live here, what I've been told, and I like to do it my own way and just sort it out for myself. You know, it might look a cumbersome thing, the pole, but what you've got to realise, everything is so accurate. You see how accurately we've plumbed the depth, how accurately we've placed the ground bait, and now with this gossamer light tattle we're placing it exactly in the same hole every time. There's another, oh, little tiny fish. They're going smaller. I thought they would have got a little bigger, but they come in every cast, but they're getting smaller by the minute. Just look at that. What a lovely sample of fish. I'm going to put a pinky on this bloodworm hook, on this fine wire bloodworm hook, and in fact I'll put a white pinky first of all, just to see if that encourages a bigger stamp of fish. No other way could you fish so accurately with such fine tattle other than with the pole. Oh, there's a bite with the pinky and a slightly bigger fish. Not a monster by no means, but at least it has increased. Oh, that one fell off, which they do, I suppose, every now and again. But it was no great loss. Well, at least this time we've got the bait down to the bottom before it was intercepted by one of those smaller fish. And you never know, we could just... Oh, that was a better stamp fish then. I just bumped it, the float just slid away nicely and I bumped it and it came off. And it did feel a little bit better. So possibly it is going to be evident that there are going to be some better stamp fish down there on the bottom. Oh, and in fact, look here. I know what that was. If I just lay it on my knee here, you see the slime on the line there, the chewed maggot and the slime on the line. Without doubt, that was a skimmer bream. There now is the evidence. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop this airy-fairy on the drop business, and I'm going to try, before I change the tattle completely, I'm going to try sliding these style weights, these strung out style weights, slide them down and bunch them together almost to represent a small olivette. And just by sliding those down the line, to give me a nice bunch of styles like that, just about 10 inches above the hook, and then just one little dropper shot, and finally a telltale shot. That will speed that bait down possibly, hopefully, past those little fish, and we might contact those skimmers. Right, with these styles now bunched down, therefore it'll speed that bait down much quicker, we might just get a chance of sorting the men from the boys. Even as I pass this pole out to that ground baited area, I can see the odd little tiny pinprick of a bubble coming up, just to let me know that those fish are there on the bottom. Well, I don't believe it. Even with those styles bunched up, another fish on the drop. It just shows that even bunching those styles up isn't heavy enough to get through the abundance of small fish that are lying out there. What I'm going to have to do is change the tattle completely, and I'm going to go for an Olivet rig and just simply a dropper shot. But an Olivet, perhaps 3 times the weight or 4 times the weight of those total number of little styles I've got there. Before we change the tattle, I'm just going to have one cast with a gozzer. These are beautiful gozzers which I bred myself. Great big, chunky, soft, white gozzers. Let's just have one cast with these and see what happens. There you are, and that feels just that little bit bigger. Looks like we may have a skimmer. I saw the elastic just stretch out of the pole for the first time then. Only came out a little way. Well, would you believe it? A little tiny skimmer. It just shows you those gozzers just make the difference. I hope there's some bigger ones than that here. That's definitely convinced me that I've got to change to that Olivet, a bigger hook, and maybe even try a double gozzer or even a bunch of bloodworms and gozzer. That is one of the favourite baits of mine, especially when we've introduced jokers to start with. You know, breeding gozzers is very, very simple, and if done correctly, very little smell. Well, those are the gozzers, beautiful, soft, irresistible to fish, beautiful soft bait, and kept in a little bit of bran to keep them big and wholesome, soft and juicy. They're quite easy to make. The gozzer fly only lays its eggs on fresh meat. So first of all, a piece of fresh meat, whether it be chicken or heart, put it in a secluded place, cover it with a bit of paper, and depending on the temperature, within a very short time, you'll get a blow. You don't need a lot of blow. In fact, this piece of chicken here has already been blown, and you can see I'm pointing at the actual blow there now. There are probably about 100 eggs there, and that's all we're concerned in breeding, just enough bait for the hook. Well, once you've got the right amount of blow, like I say, you're only interested in breeding about 100 of these maggots. If you catch a fish for every one, then you're going to win every match that you enter. All you've got to do is to wrap this parcel up into several sheets of newspaper. And the more you wrap it up, then the more insulation, the more warmth you give into that blow, and at the same time, you're stopping any other flies from depositing their eggs onto that little tiny piece of offal. After all, there's only enough offal to accommodate that small amount of blow. All we need now is a bucket with a good helping of dry bran in the bottom. Simply pop the parcel in there, and at the end of 6 days, 7 days, depending on the temperature, then those maggots will have reached maturity. The paper will tend to get a little bit wet, and therefore allowing them to escape. They'll escape no farther than the dry bran. And let's see what we've got in our parcel. Oh dear me, look at those. Beautiful, great big gozzers. Well, we've been catching a procession of skimmers to around the pound mark since we changed to this rig. And that is, as you can see, an Olivet, just about 12 inches from the hook. And there you can see it's the little tiny dropper shot, which is about 5 inches from the hook. And the successful bait has been double bloodworm and one of those beautiful succulent gozzers. This feels a better fish. See the old elastic stretching out at the end of the pole there? That fish is trying to get to the lily pads there, but it's turned. It's not as big as what I thought it was. You see the elastic now stretching and doing its job as that fish arrows even back again for the lily pads. That elastic now must be 6 foot long, look. This doesn't feel like a bream at all. Come on, my beauty. Little powerful fish this is, whatever it is. It's a little carp. Would you believe that? Little mirror carp, I think. Come on, my beauty. Little common carp, in actual fact. Not a very big one, but they pull a lot harder than a bream. I knew it wasn't a bream. Look at that pretty little thing. Whoa, this feels a better fish as well. Look at that one go for those lilies. Right, try and drag it away. Look at the elastic streaming out there. Ship that pole behind you as much as you can, but at the same time have one eye on the elastic. And of course, if the elastic starts to stretch too hard or too long, then just slow down the retrieval. One of the ways I like to play better quality fish is just put my left hand underneath the pole like that, where I can guide that fish and sort of make it swim, or try to make it swim in the direction that I want it to, until it starts to pull back too hard like that. There you can actually see the elastic doing the job for us. Oh, look at that elastic stretch now. This feels like another carp. In fact, the bream have gone off a little bit, and I often find that on these sort of mixed fisheries, that whilst the bream may be there initially, once the carp turn up for their picnic, then often it's the end of the bream. Come on, let's have a look at you. It's just refusing to come up, but that elastic stretch is continually putting pressure on that. There he is. This time this one is a mirror carp. Once you've got his head up, try and keep his head up. Oh, there he goes back down again. Once you get the head up, try and keep the head up, and you should then, that's it, be able to skim him towards the net. He's mine. So nice, that is a bonny fish. I'm just going to put the pole in its rest here. That is a lovely fish. Now that one's mirror carp. Always keep the pole pointing skywards if you can. When you've got a quality fish on like this, the worst thing you do is that fish pulls. If you lower the pole at the fish, then you can be in jeopardy of his sections coming apart. I've seen anglers lower the pole at the fish, and then all of a sudden the pole has come undone and the top section has gone flying after the fish. So always keep the pole tip high and let the elastic do the work. Just like that fish, well, it's a tench. See it just roll over on the top then. Well, we are getting variety today. Come on, the game little fish, these tench are. There he comes. Keep his head up. Oh, not as easy as what it sounds sometimes. There he comes this time. Lovely fish. What a beautiful fish a tench is. Just take this hook out of its mouth. There you are, a lovely fish. Beautiful green in colour. The old red eyes there. Let's get him in the net quickly. In you go, my beauty. My word, this one's a live wire. Here we've got some good action here. This one's really going mad. This feels like a much better fish. Look at it stretch that elastic. It really is good fun with this elastic. You can't half handle big fish with fairly light gear. Right, he's after those weeds. Come on, away from those weeds, you beauty. I've got to put some pressure on him now. Come on. He's turned, There's the float out of the water. Let's ship that pole back as quickly as possible, keeping that line tight. Always just feel a big heavy fish is going through. I have to slip another section of pole on again, quickly. In fact, that's a good tip. When you do unship your sections, always have the other sections handy to slip back on again, like I'm going to have to do here, and follow that fish as he goes round that corner. It is a good fish, this. It's going right round the corner. Come back. I must send that pole back before he gets me towards those weed beds. It does feel a damn good fish. I'm not even sure what it is. It felt like a bream at first, but then the power of it's like a carp, because bream don't usually fight that hard at all. But it's... Oh, come back. Come back. Unless it's foul hook, this fish. Sometimes if you foul hook a fish, they seem to fight twice as hard. You know, especially big fish, you soon get a false bite as they swim past the line. Right? I'm not sure whether this one's foul hooked or not, but I know it does like to want to go around that corner. I've not even seen it yet. Just a big boil and a big swirl in the water. There. Oh, it is. It's a bream. It's a proper bream. It's a powerful bream as well. Come on, my beauty. All you've got to do with these is just make them lie down and roll over. Stay away from those weeds. That's it. I think he's getting to the end now. That's it. Here he comes. No, he's not finished yet. The thing is not to rush these big fish, just take your time, let the elastic do the work for you. You see, I've taken a section off too many here. I've taken the section off where the white tape is, but because the elastic is stretched so long, then I need that extra section on in order to control that fish at the net. He still doesn't want to give in, this one. Well, I'm glad this fight is happening out of the swim, because the worst thing that could have happened, I hooked this fish on the ground baited area there, and if I'd have had this fight actually on the swim, then it would have frightened the rest of the shoal without doubt. There we go. Oh, that's a lump of a fish. That must be 3 to 4 pound in weight. Yes, there's another good quality fish. In fact, it's proving to have been a good decision to have ground baited exactly at the bottom of that shelf, or between the bottom of the shelf and the actual weed bed there. Fish are coming quite regular now. It's really good fun. I always enjoy it more when you see that elastic stretching. It really is wonderful gear, that. You just keep that rod pointing upwards and just let the elastic do the work. You see what happens, unlike fishing the rod and reel, when you hook a fish on a rod and reel, first time it runs off, the angler backwinds and give a fish an inch and it wants a yard. But with the elastic, as it dives and it progressively stretches that elastic, the progressive build-up of power in the elastic just turns that fish over, and it's quite easy to land good fish on very, very light tattles. This has got to be another carp the way it's going, just round and round in circles, just past the bottom of my keep net. Just give it time. Often it's a sign of good fish when they just do that. All you can see is just the odd boils coming up from the bottom as it's going round. See the boils now, round and round it's going. It's funny, it's coming up towards the top now. I can see the Olivet out of the water. Come on, let's have a look at you. Yes, another mirror carp. Just wagging round and round. Terrific power in the tails. Mouth open, that's what we want to see. And underneath it with the net. That's a beautifully marked fish. That's another mirror carp. Bit more scales on it than the last one. You can see a beautifully marked fish. Nice full tail and beautiful pattern. Take that hook and just put him gently in the net. There you go, my beaut. Well, we finally sorted out the method. I mean, whilst the little fish were there in mid-water and playing havoc with us on the drop, once we put that Olivet rig on and zoomed our bait past those little fish, we got to the quality fish underneath. This pole fishing really is a deadly method, but beware, don't get contaminated with the dreadful disease politis. That means every time you get to the water's edge, out comes the pole. There are times when the fish are out of reach of the pole and other means of distance fishing are necessary. So from me, till next time, tight lines.